To God be the glory.
Another place we desperately need God's wisdom is in the home. Children need to grow in wisdom towards their parents. Parents need to grow in wisdom towards their children. Husbands and wives need to grow in wisdom towards each other. And the entire family unit needs to grow in wisdom towards God. Solomon says, "The righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him." The idea here is that a father who is righteous will have a positive impact on his children. In other words, the next generation will benefit if we apply God's wisdom in our families. Faithful and wise families lead to more faithful and wise families. So if you come from a family that you would not describe as faithful and wise, now is the time to chart a new course. Break the cycle. Or perhaps your family today is struggling, and you desperately want to honor God in your home and see God's blessings in your home. It's not too late to call a family meeting. Make it known that God is now the leader of your home, and things are going to be done God's way from now on. As parents, we might even need to confess that we have not been setting a good example, and that God has not been at the center of our home, but that changes today. You can make that clear. It's not too late to make the same declaration that Joshua famously made about his family when he said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Something I find very interesting about the wisdom God shares with us in this book of Proverbs about family is that God's direction for us is the complete opposite of what the world is teaching us today about how things ought to be in the home. But I would invite you to ask yourself the important question, how has the world's way worked out? Are we better off today? Do the statistics support the theories of the world on family matters? Are marriages more successful today than they were in the past? Are our children better citizens and less likely to get in trouble today? Is the level of education and discipline, or lack thereof, given to children resulting in lower crime rates or just better behaved kids in school? When you look at the people you work with, are they stellar employees? They just work with great integrity and vigor because they were taught strong work ethics from their parents? No. Everything is getting worse, and we can see it right before our eyes. The world's way of doing things simply has not worked. Solomon's focus in the book of Proverbs is primarily on how parents should be raising children. But he does spend some time giving advice for husbands and wives as well. So let's start with husbands and wives. When it comes to marriage, in the book of Proverbs, the focus is on the great impact the husband or the wife can have for good or for bad in the home. If you start with the negative, Solomon says this, "Better to dwell in a corner of the housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman." He rephrases it another way just a few verses later when he says, "Better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman." I want you to keep in mind that Solomon is giving advice in this book to his sons. So his focus is on their female spouse. This goes both ways, right? The impact one angry spouse has, one negative spouse, doesn't matter if it's the husband or the wife, one untrustworthy spouse, the impact they have on the relationship is great. And it's so great that Solomon says it's better not to be in the same room with them. in certain circumstances. If you had to choose between being homeless with peace of mind or in a mansion where there is strife, a rational person will choose being homeless every time. But on the positive side, Solomon says this, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones." Making a wise choice when it comes to selecting a spouse is clearly important. A wise choice can make life great, and a foolish choice can make a person miserable their entire lives. The only thing worse than being single and lonely is being married and lonely. But Solomon chooses to use more ink on the positive impacts of a good spouse. And I think that if you look at the virtuous wife of Proverbs 31, you see a woman putting into practice all of the wisdom that Solomon shares in this great book. She fears the Lord and lives her life accordingly. She gets up early and works hard for her family. She owns her own business. The text says she helps the poor. She's kind to everyone. And her children and her husband praise her. Now imagine a home where the husband is also like that. He's wise, he's kind, he's hardworking and respected. All of those things that come with fearing the Lord. That's the ideal marriage. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to what Solomon has to say about parenting. I think it goes without saying, parenting is a difficult job. It takes a lot of effort, and frankly, it's a lot of trial and error as we do our best to figure out what works with each child we are raising. Even when you work hard at parenting and you try to do the right thing, it can be difficult to know if you are actually doing the right thing. Am I doing enough? Am I doing what I ought to be doing? Do I discipline enough? Am I disciplining in a way that produces the desired outcome? Am I too harsh? Am I not hard enough? Why do my parenting tactics work on one of my children but not on the others? I think the key takeaway from the book of Proverbs is that Solomon helps aim us in the right direction. He doesn't focus so much on specific scenarios and magical words as he does on telling us where to aim. If your primary aim is to push your child intellectually so that you focus on academic accomplishment, and maybe you're thinking, well, that will lead them to college scholarship, or that will lead them to a good job, which could lead them to financial success, Solomon says your aim's off. Or maybe your primary aim is to push your child towards athletics. And you're thinking that's the right path because it will help them learn teamwork, winning and losing, good work ethics. This will ultimately lead them to success in life. Solomon would tell us again, our aim is off. Now, there's nothing wrong with having children who are good students or gifted athletes. But Solomon wants parents to aim their children towards God. At least 15 times in the first several chapters of the book, you hear Solomon use words like my son or my sons. And then each time he asks for their attention, he then addresses a topic that will help prepare them for the real world. And remember, these are not random topics. This is inspired wisdom from God. God is sharing it with us through Solomon, not just for Solomon's children, but for ours as well. The book even starts with these words, my son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother. Listen to what Solomon says a few chapters later. He says, my son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. When you awake, they will speak to you. For the commandment is a lamp and the law a light. This sounds a lot like the instruction Moses gives to Israel back in Deuteronomy 6, where Moses commands parents to speak to their children and teach them from sunrise to sunset. That role does not belong to the local school. It doesn't even belong to the Sunday school teacher. It belongs to the parents. And this is very practical. This is I think, practical assignment all parents need to focus on. Spend time talking to your children. Talk to them about life. Teach them about life. When it comes to parenting, we are in it for the long haul. It's not the sort of thing you schedule on your calendar. Oh, okay, over here, at this time I'll do some parenting. And then I'll mark it complete after we've had a good chat about something. Perhaps the most famous proverb on the topic is this: train up a child in the way he should go. Some say that means according to his bent, but either way, Solomon then says, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. In the book of Proverbs, we see Solomon teaching his children about a lot of things. Authority, that's a big topic, with an emphasis on God's authority and the importance of fearing God. But he also talks about the importance of being thoughtful in life. So he talks about discretion, discernment, prudence in decision-making. He speaks a lot about resisting temptation, and sexual temptation takes up a lot of space in what Solomon shares with his children. He talks about peer pressure, priorities, obedience, integrity. Solomon also talks about consequences, and he brings up ultimately God's discipline. These are all important subjects, and Solomon often repeats himself. He repeats himself in sharing this wisdom because children often do not learn from a single sit-down lecture, do they? We as parents need to be repetitious. But think about it, rephrase things as many different ways as you can. When you study what Solomon shares with his sons about sexual immorality, for example, he will reframe it in all kinds of word pictures. For example, he says that getting into bed with someone you shouldn't be in bed with is like walking on hot coals. On another occasion, he says it's like an ox being led to the slaughter. He compares it to a deer stepping into a trap or a bird in a snare. He even tells his sons it's like taking a road that leads to a newly dug grave in a cemetery. These are all concrete images that his sons could picture and understand. The book of Proverbs just does a great job providing real-life examples of how things work in the real world, and I think it's important for us to do the same thing. Share with your children the things you've learned. Share with them where you've made mistakes. Share with them the consequences of those errors, and talk to them as things are happening in real time in your life, if you can. I want you to imagine the power of your children seeing your wise actions and reactions as a visual to go with the words that you've been sharing with them all along. What they see will no doubt be more powerful than anything you say. So I think the key takeaway here is more about methodology and less about specific words to share. It's more about aim and getting your children to see that they should be moving in a particular direction while avoiding paths that lead to heartache and destruction. That's important. And that leads us to the second component of training children, which is discipline. This is a topic some find controversial, but there's no lack of clarity in what Solomon says. So we'll let the Bible just speak for itself here. Here's what God says in the book of Proverbs. He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. Here's another one. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. Do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. He goes on to say, correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. Okay, that's a lot, so let's do our best to define and understand what's being said here. First, it's important to understand that the image of the rod is likely a reference to the rod used by a shepherd, not to abuse the sheep. We're not saying that children and animals are the same. But that rod is used to guide and to steer them away from danger and harm. So he's arguing that if it works on the animal, our children should be able to pick up on the purpose of the rod as well. It is, however, important to include what Paul writes on this topic when he says this, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And here it is, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Discipline is important, but Paul includes a very important note to parents about a kind of discipline that only provokes wrath and does not bring about change. I would also add here that training needs to precede discipline. That's very important. Disciplining a child for doing something wrong when they were never trained on how to do it right is not going to be productive. The Bible has a lot more to say about marriage and parenting, of course, but these Proverbs give us important wisdom for the home. Many are not following God's pattern for the home today, and we can see the negative impacts it's having on the societies we live in. If we want the best possible outcome, we must do things God's way. We'll see you next time.